Welcome students. Today we will discuss about hypothalamic and pituitary hormone. This is part of your unit 4 of endocrine system of the subject Human Anatomy and Physiology-II, and the subject code is BP201T. Myself Geetika Mehta, associated with Rajkumar Goel, Institute of Technology, Pharmacy, Ghaziabad. In this lecture, we will discuss various pituitary hormones. In the previous lecture, we have already discussed various types of hormone, their classification, that is basic introduction we have covered in the previous lecture. So, to start with master gland. Pituitary gland is known as master gland, also known as hypophysis. So, why do we call it master gland? Because pituitary gland secretes 7 hormones, and these 7 hormones control other glands. So, because they control other gland secretion, other hormones, they control other hormone secretion. So, they are known as tropic hormones. They are known as tropic hormones. So, hormones that are secreted from the pituitary glands are known as tropic hormones, and pituitary gland is known as master gland because it secretes 7 hormones and control other glands. Now, hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is the small region of the brain below the thalamus. It is present below the thalamus. Hypothalamus is the major link between nervous and endocrine system. It regulates growth, development, metabolism and homeostasis. Now, hypothalamus synthesizes 9 different hormones. It synthesizes 9 different hormones, and these 9 different hormones control the secretion of 7 hormones of pituitary gland. Controls the secretion of 7 hormones of pituitary gland. So, that is why, because pituitary is master gland and hypothalamus control the pituitary gland secretion. So, hypothalamus is known as master of master gland. Now, this is the structure of pituitary gland. So, pituitary gland is a small P-shaped, मटर के दाने की तरह P-shaped structure है, and this is present in the hypophyseal fossa of sella turcica of sphenoid bone. So, this is the sphenoid bone, and this depression is hypophyseal fossa, and in this hypophyseal fossa our master gland pituitary gland is present, and this pituitary gland is attached to the hypothalamus. This is hypothalamus, this is pituitary gland, and pituitary gland is divided into 2 lobes. One is anterior pituitary, this is anterior pituitary, and this is posterior pituitary. Anterior pituitary is larger. You can see 70% of the total weight of the gland, 75% is consists of anterior pituitary, rest is posterior pituitary, and this pituitary gland is attached to the hypothalamus through the infundibulum, which is a stalk which attaches the hypothalamus to the pituitary. So, pituitary has 2 lobes, anterior pituitary known as adenohypophysis, posterior pituitary known as neurohypophysis, and this neurohypophysis consists of neural tissue. So, you can see this is hypothalamus, these are the cell bodies and their axon travel from, and their axon terminals are present in the pituitary, and these are the blood capillaries, that is hypophyseal portal system through which hormones are secreted into the blood. They enter into the blood and then they reaches into from the hypothalamus, they reaches into the anterior pituitary and then anterior pituitary secretes their hormone into the blood which goes to the target gland. So, this is the structure of pituitary gland. Now, various hormones of pituitary gland. So, as we have seen anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary, the two parts, two lobes of the pituitary. Anterior pituitary secretes growth hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, adenocorticotropic hormone, melanocyte hormone, stimulating hormone, prolactin, LH, luteinizing hormone and FSH. So, these are the 7 hormones that are secreted from the anterior pituitary, and 2 hormones, antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. 2 hormones, antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin, they are synthesized, they are secreted by the posterior pituitary. So, these are the major target organ where they do act. This we will study. Major physiological their action we will study in detail in further slides. Anterior pituitary hormones. So, hypothalamus neurosecretory neurons secrete hormones that strictly control secretion of hormones from the anterior pituitary. So, anterior pituitary hormones are under control of hypothalamus. How? Because hypothalamus releasing hormones and hypothalamus release inhibiting hormones are carried directly to the anterior pituitary gland via hypothalamic hypophyseal portal vein. So, in the previous slide we have seen this is the hypothalamus hypophyseal portal system, that is blood capillaries that surrounds the pituitary gland. So, releasing hormones and the release inhibiting hormones, 9 hormones that are secreted from the hypothalamus, in which mainly releasing hormone and 2 inhibiting hormones that are secreted from the hypothalamus. They goes to the anterior pituitary through this portal system and then anterior pituitary synthesizes its 7 hormone and then these 7 hormones goes to the target gland. So, anterior pituitary is the under control of hypothalamic releasing hormone, which releases turns on the anterior pituitary, inhibiting hormones which turns off the anterior pituitary hormone secretion. So, hypothalamic hormones, these hormones binds to their receptor on the anterior pituitary and then they affect the release or inhibition of their hormones. So, this is all controlled by negative feedback mechanism. Now, this is the classification. So, in anterior pituitary there are 5 types of cell. There are 5 types of the cell: somatotrophs, thyrotrophs, gonadotrophs, lectotrophs and corticotrophs. These 5 type of cell synthesize and secrete 7 hormones: human growth hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, prolactin, ACTH, that is adenocorticotropic hormone and melanocyte hormones. So, these 7 hormones of anterior pituitary are synthesized and secreted by 5 type of cells of anterior pituitary under the control of hypothalamus. Under the control of hypothalamus. Hypothalamic releasing hormones, that is which stimulate the release of the hormone, are growth hormone releasing hormone which stimulates the release of growth hormone from the somatotroph, thyrotropin releasing hormone which stimulates the release of TSH from the thyrotroph, gonadotropin releasing hormone which stimulates the release of FSH and LH from gonadotroph, prolactin releasing hormone which stimulates the release of lactotrophs from the lactotrophs, release of the prolactin from the lactotrophs, and CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone which stimulates the release of ACTH and MSH from the corticotrophs. And what are the inhibiting hormone? That inhibit the secretion of pituitary hormones from the pituitary glands, and it is released from the hypothalamus. So, growth hormone inhibiting hormone somatostatin, somato means growth, statin means stop, it inhibits the growth. So, it inhibits the release of human growth hormone from the pituitary gland. It also inhibits the release of thyroid stimulating hormone. Another is prolactin inhibiting hormone, that is dopamine inhibit the prolactin secretion. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 7 release stimulating hormone and rest are inhibiting hormones of hypothalamus, control the synthesis and secretion of anterior pituitary hormones. Now, as we have already discussed that the secretion of anterior hypothalamus is controlled by hypothalamus, by hypothalamic hormones. Another regulation by negative feedback system in the form of hormones released by target glands. Okay. So, hormones released by target glands decreases the secretion of thyrotrophs, gonadotrophs and corticotrophs. So, how do they regulate? How do they regulate? Anterior pituitary controls the secretion of other hormone, and anterior pituitary secretion is controlled by hypothalamus. So, by taking one example, we can see that CRH, corticotropic releasing hormone, is released from the hypothalamus. This CRH goes to the pituitary and stimulate the formation of ACTH from the corticotropin cells, ACTH from the corticotropin cells, and this ACTH, this corticotropin hormone stimulates the secretion of cortisol by adrenal cortex. Adrenal cortex is part of adrenal gland which is present on the kidney. So, CRH is released from the hypothalamus. This CRH goes to anterior pituitary, there it stimulates the release of corticotropin. Corticotropin enters into the blood, goes to the adrenal cortex, and then it stimulates the secretion of cortisol. So, here ACTH is controlling secretion of cortisol or CRH is controlling secretion of ACTH. As soon as cortisol level rises, it will inhibit the release of ACTH from the anterior pituitary, and it will also inhibit the release of CRH from the hypothalamus. So, no more cortisol will be released when it is inhibited by the negative feedback mechanism. So, as soon as level of the hormone rises, it inhibits the release of their stimulatory hormones from the pituitary and from the hypothalamus. So, this is negative feedback mechanism which will regulate secretion of most of the hormones through this mechanism. Now, one by one we will discuss the pituitary hormones. Human growth hormone is the most abundant pituitary hormone. Its function is to stimulate liver, muscle, cartilage, bone and tissue to synthesize and secrete insulin like growth factors. Insulin like growth factor, what does it do? It promotes growth of the body cell, protein synthesis, tissue repair, lipolysis, breakdown of the lipid, elevation of the blood glucose concentration. It also stimulates it promote the secretion of human growth hormone. What are the factors that stimulate the secretion of human growth hormones are decreased fatty acids, increased amino acid in the blood, deep sleep, during stress, glucagon, estrogen, cortisol and insulin. So, these are the stimulus that promote secretion of human growth hormone. So, during sleep, growth hormone secretion is increased. So, what does growth hormone does? Human growth hormone secretes IGF, insulin growth factor, which causes the growth of the skeletal muscle, growth of the muscle mass and growth of the repair of the tissues. So, this insulin growth factor is secreted by human growth hormones. So, this is the how it is regulated. So, as soon as there is blood glucose level decreases, that is hypoglycemia, it will stimulate the release of GHRH, growth hormone releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. This GHRH will stimulate the release of human growth hormone from the somatotrophs of anterior pituitary. This human growth hormone will release into the blood, and from the blood it will go to the target site, that is to the liver, to the skeletal muscles, to different target cell, where they will form IGF, where they will form insulin growth factor. This insulin growth factor will produce their action. So, during the hypoglycemia, it will cause blood glucose level will increase, because insulin growth factor will speed up the breakdown of glycogen. Glycogen will convert into the glucose and blood glucose level will reach to the normal. If there is continuous increase in the blood glucose level because of the stimulation of high HGH, then by the negative feedback mechanism, this increase in blood glucose level inhibit the growth hormone releasing hormone, and growth hormone inhibitory hormone inhibit the release of action of human growth hormone in the similar way. So, this is how HGH is regulated. Gonadotropins are FSH and LH. Their main target site is, their main target gland is ovaries. There in the females, they causes the development of the ovarian follicles, secretion of the estrogen. LH also stimulates the ovulation, formation of corpus luteum, secretion of the progesterone and estrogen, and thus it helps in maintaining the pregnancy. In males, LH stimulate production of testosterone, which is the principal male sex hormone. FSH and testosterone stimulate sperm production in the testes in males. Thyroid stimulating hormone, it stimulates and senses the secretion of thyroid hormone, and so its target gland is thyroid gland. Its secretion is stimulated by TRH and suppressed by GHIH, as we have discussed in the previous table. Prolactin, it promotes milk production by mammary glands with permissive action of other hormones like human growth hormone, oxytocin. Prolactin inhibiting hormone suppresses the secretion of prolactin, and prolactin releasing hormone stimulates prolactin secretion. Adenocorticotropic hormone, which is again anterior pituitary hormone known as corticotropin, it stimulates the secretion of glucocorticoids from the adrenal cortex of adrenal gland, and this ACTH is controlled by CRH from hypothalamus. Melanocyte stimulating hormone, they can cause darkening of skin, which is also a anterior pituitary hormone. Now, we talk about posterior pituitary hormones. Posterior pituitary hormone, they do not synthesize their hormone, they only store and release hormone. Two hormones, that is oxytocin and antidiuretic hormones, are posterior pituitary hormones. So, once again I am telling you that posterior pituitary does not synthesize hormone, they only store and release these two hormones. These hormones are synthesized in the neurosecretory cells of hypothalamus. These are these two hormones, oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone, they are secreted, they are synthesized in the neurosecretory cells of the hypothalamus, and then they are released into the posterior pituitary, and from the posterior pituitary they enters into the blood circulation. Now, what are the action of oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone? Oxytocin causes the contraction of uterus. So, during childbirth it has two target organ, one is uterus, one is breast, that is mammary gland. So, during childbirth oxytocin causes the stretching of cervix of the uterus. So, it stimulates the release of oxytocin, which in turn enhances the contraction of uterine muscles, uterine smooth muscle, and thus it helps in the delivery of child. It helps in the, it facilitates the delivery of child. And after delivery it stimulates the milk ejection, that is lactation from the mammary gland in response to mechanical stimulus provided by the sucking infant. So, it causes the contraction of the mammary gland, so that milk can be ejected, that is known as lactation. So, lactation and contraction of uterus is the two action of oxytocin. Antidiuretic hormone, as the name shows, antidiuretic, that is diuresis decreases, that is decreases urine production. So, to decrease urine production it will conserve water, it will save water, it will send more and more water to blood, reabsorption will increase, water reabsorption will increase. So, it decreases the water loss through the urine as well as through the perspiration by the sweating, decreases the urine production, decreases the sweating to conserve water loss during dehydration. It also raises the blood pressure. So, it is known as vasopressin because it causes constriction of the arterioles. So, it increases the blood pressure. So, it is known as vasopressin. Antidiuretic hormone is also known as vasopressin. Next is how secretion of antidiuretic hormone is controlled. Whenever there is a dehydration, whenever there is a low blood volume, so body will conserve water to compensate, body regulatory mechanism will activate to conserve water. So, in this antidiuretic hormone play very important role. The neurosecretory cell of the hypothalamus secrete antidiuretic hormone in response to elevated blood osmotic pressure, dehydration, loss of blood volume, pain or stress. Alcohol is inhibitor of antidiuretic hormone. So, as soon as there is high blood osmotic pressure, it will stimulate hypothalamic osmoreceptors. Osmoreceptors will activate neurosecretory cells in hypothalamus, and that will secrete and release the antidiuretic hormone. This hypothalamus will release the antidiuretic hormone in the response of activation of osmoreceptors when there is the high osmotic pressure or when there is the dehydration. So, this antidiuretic hormone will be released from the anterior pituitary and it will conserve the water. Kidneys will retain more water and thus it will decrease urine output. Sweat glands they will form less of, they will secrete less of sweating, they will cause less sweating. constriction of arteriole will result in the vasopressin. So, these are the action of antidiuretic hormone. As soon as opposite will occur when there is low blood osmotic pressure, so there will be inhibition of the release of antidiuretic hormone. So, pituitary gland disorders, dwarfism, gigantism, acromegaly. So, when there is hyposecretion of human growth hormone, it will result in the decreased bone growth. So, normal height will not be achieved. So, pituitary dwarfism mein there will be the less height. Gigantism, hypersecretion of human growth hormone. So, it will cause abnormal increase in the length of the long bones and the person will grow very tall, gigantism. Acromegaly, it occur in adults. Dwarfism and gigantism occur during the childhood years, growth years mein, but in acromegaly, hypersecretion of human growth hormone during adulthood, which results in the bones of hand, feet, cheek and jaw thick and other tissue enlarges. So, skin thicks and it develops furrows, and because epiphyseal plate has already closed, so there is no further lengthening of the long bone in acromegaly. So, these are the few of the pituitary gland disorders. Diabetes insipidus, when there is the defect in the ADH antidiuretic hormone receptors or inability to secrete antidiuretic hormone. It can be neurogenic and nephrogenic. So, there will be excess secretion of the urine. So, large volume of the urine will be secreted and so it will result in the dehydration and thirst. So, bedwetting is common in case of the diabetes insipidus. So, diabetes insipidus occur when there is a defect in the antidiuretic hormone action or in their receptors. So, these were the hormones and these are the references for the further study. So, we in this lecture we have covered pituitary hormones, anterior pituitary as well as posterior pituitary and hypothalamic hormones. Thank you.